Alright, so in today's lesson of our beginning C course, we're going to take a look at creating our own data structures and how we can define our own types with them. So let's get started with another program. Alright, so basically in other programming languages besides for C, we have the notion of objects. Basically ways that we can store related collections of data and represent them within our program. But in C, we don't directly have objects or classes. There's not exactly sort of an equivalent to the style of object-oriented programming that you'll see in Python or Ruby. So we have structures, and we can declare them to hold related sets of data. And we can kind of manipulate them in the same way that we work with objects. So let's create a basic structure and put some data in it. So we can declare a structure with the struct statement, and they'll look a little bit like this. So structures look kind of like functions in terms of structures. We have our struct keyword, the name of what we want to call the structure. In this case, we're going to call it point. And inside here, we're going to have our actual collections of data. So let's just define an x, a y, and a z variable for this particular point. And then we can add a semicolon at the end of our structure, unlike functions. And that's basically it. So now we have an object-like sort of data structure that we can manipulate in our main method. So let's create an instance, so to speak, of our structure and add some data to it. We can declare sort of an instance of our structure in this way. We use struct and the structure name, like we did in the declaration, and then we provide a name for what we're going to call this particular structure. And then we can use dot notation to set and get variables of this structure. So let's set the x, y, and z values with dots, like this. So our new point structure we can access like this, and then to access the x value, we access it in this way. So let's set all of these to individual values. So basically, we have a collection of related data that we can all access under one name. And so if we need to get any of these individual variables, we can access them in the same way that we've been able to set them with this dot notation. So we can print these out and read these values in the same way that we were setting them. So that's basically it. We can set the values using dot notation and get the values using dot notation. So let's just go ahead and compile this and make sure the output's correct. So as you can see, all of the values that we set for our particular point that we created, the structure has retained those values and we're able to print them out. So structures kind of help the way that we can deal with data in our program. One additional thing we can do to kind of transform the way we work with data and data types is we can actually define new types in C. So we can define types that were basically aliases of other types. And we can apply that to structures as well. But first let's look at it in the basic case. Let's say we want another name for an integer type. So we can use the typedef keyword to create a new type. So basically what typedef does is allows us to define a new type in our program, and then we can use that type whenever we want to declare a variable of the new type that we've declared. So now we could create a new integer. And this is a valid type that C will know about now because we've used the typedef statement. So the way that we can apply this to structures is we can actually define structures as types so that we can declare them without having to use the struct keyword. So basically here, when we declare our sort of instance of the structure, we can remove the need to have struct everywhere. So let's take a look at doing that. So now, because we've used typedef and defined our point structure as an actual type in C now, we basically can remove the struct statement here. And our code basically is the exact same as it was before. We have our struct data type now that contains all of the same information that our structure did before, except it's an actual type, so we can use it in the way that you see here. We don't have to use the struct keyword every time we want a new structure of whatever type. So we can actually run this code and see that it works exactly the same as it did before. So when we define our structures as types, we can use them in a much cleaner and simpler way within our code, but it basically isn't really too different from having our structures defined in the way that they were before. We just have to use them a little differently. So while structures aren't too critical for this particular example, they can be really helpful for organizing the way we want to deal with data in our application. And as in the future lessons we start to look at a little bit more complicated applications, we're going to use structures as ways to hold together particular sets of operations for data. So that's basically an overview of how you can use structures and types in C.